Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is actually part two. Sorry, the screen says part one, but we are part two of the webinar series on success criteria and teacher clarity. And once again, we're thrilled to have so many of you join from all over the United States and around the world. And I want to do a quick recap about Zoom keeping reminders. Most of you have learned about your chat box. Just make sure that drop down is pointing to everyone so that all of us can see your chat. And then to disable or enable closed captioning, go ahead and click on your live transcript icon and you can select your preferences. And a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and the recording along with your certificate of attendance will be sent to you via email on Wednesday. You can register for any upcoming Corwin webinars and view all of our archived webinars at corwin.com/webinars. And I went over this last time, so I won't do it again, but some really great lineup of webinars yet this year. And as a reminder, you can use the code webinars through the end of the year to get 20% off and free shipping on the Success Criteria Playbook and Teacher Clarity Playbook. So now I'm so excited that today we will be giving away a free seat to an upcoming Corwin Institute, and that will be at the end of today's session. It'll be picked at random and you must be online to win, so be sure to stay towards the end. And you can look at all of the upcoming Corwin Institutes at corwin.com/institutes. And now, after the wonderful presentation last week by John Amador and Kateri Thunder, today I have the pleasure of introducing Doug Fisher and Olivia Amador Valerio. Olivia has been in the field of education for 24 years, including 14 as an elementary school principal. Her teaching experience includes 10 years as an elementary bilingual teacher and reading language arts specialist, supporting students with reading deficits. Her leadership journey includes participation in instructional leadership teams, professional learning networks, as well as leadership design teams focused on cultural proficiency and equity. One of Olivia's most notable accomplishments while she served as a principal was receiving the National Center for Urban School Transformation Gold Award. And as you might have noticed, Olivia is a co-author on the Teacher Clarity Playbook. And Doug Fisher is a professor and chair of educational leadership at San Diego State University, a leader at Health Sciences High and Middle College, as well as having been an early intervention teacher and elementary school educator. He's the recipient of an International Reading Association William S. Gray Citation of Merit, a Kent Williamson Exemplary Leader Award from the Conference on English Leadership of NCTE, as well as a Krista McAuliffe Award for Excellence in Teacher Education. Doug has published numerous articles on reading and literacy, differentiated instruction, and curriculum design, as well as numerous books such as the PLC Plus series, Rebound, Leading the Rebound, and most recently, How Learning Works. You can find out what Doug is up to by following him on Twitter at dfisher, SDSU, and on Instagram at dougfisher.educator. So Olivia, the group is ready for your wonderful presentation and they're all yours.
Thank you so much. And welcome to our Monday afternoon webinar series. It's a great way to come together as just fellow colleagues, educators, and to just take some time to invest in our own professional learning, right? So hopefully you are situated in a comfortable space and place, and we are going to continue on the journey that was started last week with our good friend, John Elmerode and Kateri Thunder. And so today, what we're going to do is just think about and imagine what we can design, what we can implement, how we can firm up and polish up current systems that are working for students. And then also think about it through the lens of how can we make sure that our current systems are working for all of our students. And so when we think about an approach to ensuring accessibility to the learning experiences for all students, Teacher clarity is one pathway that has transformed not only outcomes for students, but has led to a transformation in how we think about the impact we're having on outcomes for all of our students. And so our success criteria for this round of professional learning, last round, we spent some time really thinking about the role of learning intentions and success criteria as a move of interactions that help to establish communication between teacher clarity and student clarity. And then also time was spent in thinking about what are the different ways that we can make this communication robust. So that way, that learning that students are about to take on not only is rigorous and challenging, but it's visible. So for this round, what we're going to spend some time thinking about and examining is the relationship side that teacher clarity helps to promote between teacher clarity and student clarity. We're going to look at the different ways that we can not only check in with students about progress and or achievement, but also how techniques that fit under the umbrella of teacher clarity help to build out students who are assessment capable and who are able to accurately judge their own progress and achievement. And we're also going to think about the components of clarity and how clarity in our units of study, clarity present at the discussion and collaboration table, clarity of assessment help us to ensure that all of these pieces fit together and that, again, students are accessing not only quality learning, but learning that is aligned to expectations and that is going to contribute to greater learning independence at a time when our students are establishing and reestablishing their relationship with learning and perhaps trying to reevaluate, well, what is my identity? How do I see myself as a learner? What is my philosophy about learning? And it's the same for instructors, teachers, leaders. We're all trying to, once again, firm up what it is that we believe we can achieve together, and then convince our hearts and minds that, yes, our efforts are making a difference for all of our students. So with that, let's go ahead and open up our professional learning journey and let's think about, well, what are some of the ways that we establish and assess our clarity through the student-facing side and the teacher-facing side? And what we go back and think about is the tagline, the sentence that really started it all for us. When we think about our big why in the sky, why are we investing in clarity? We're thinking about it through this lens. So take a moment to read that. And for many of you who have been on this journey with us, this is a familiar sentence. It's a familiar tagline. For those of you who are new to the journey, this is one that helps to drive our professional generosity, our collegiality. And again, when we think about the long reach of this journey, it's right here, because we firmly believe that every student deserves a great teacher, not by chance, but by design. So how do we invest in ourselves to ensure that when students see us, they are convinced that this is someone that not only do I trust, but I know that I can learn with and from. So let me take a moment. And again, as you are rereading or perhaps reading for the first time, what stands out to you about this sentence? Perhaps it's a word, it's a cluster of words, but let's go ahead and come together in the chat. And let's just go ahead and begin to create some community, create some movement. When you read this sentence, share with us what stands out to you about these words and how they're arranged. By design, every student, purposeful, not by chance. I have to say, every cell in my body is charged right now because, again, it really just takes us back to our internal why. And we think about the impact that we have on the learning lives of students. And it's with the intentionality and by the design in a collaborative space where you are building out not only your own efficacy, but that collective efficacy. It's exciting to be able to once again reflect and think how teacher clarity has transformed not only how we talk about our impact, but how we view this work and how together we can build it back better and stronger. All right, beautiful. Thank you so much again for coming together in the chat. If we can't be together in person, we'll find creative ways to stay connected and again, share with each other how we're processing what we're currently thinking about. And this is what we want to really firm up in our thoughts, that everything we do has an impact in the learning lives of our students. The work is, what kind of impact are we looking to achieve? And so Dr. Hattie, what he was able to just name for us are some characteristics and traits that help to build out and build up a great teacher, right? He further defined it through his research. When we think about great teachers, we're going to think about it through the lens of effectiveness, right? And so here's what he says. This is what highly effective teachers do. So take a look at this. Where do you see yourself in your experience with your expertise? Are there moments where you felt like you had just synergy, you had all of the components necessary to produce powerful, meaningful, and memorable learning for your students? We call this nirvana, perhaps, right? And so this is what we're striving for, right? And so the question then is, well, how? How do we achieve this consistently? What is it that we can do to ensure that our students are in the presence of that great teacher, that highly effective teacher? And so our challenge is, it's not so much how do we achieve it, it's more about why, right? What is it that is going to fuel our professional learning so that we improve not only our impact on outcomes, but we firmly believe and invest that this work is the right work that's going to lead to meaningful learning for all, right? So the answer to the how is more about the why. And when we think about the long reach of teacher clarity and our why, for those of us that are in just the work of teacher clarity, either in grade levels or coaching or leading the work, or perhaps writing about the work, we think about the long reach of this approach to planning, to teaching, to evaluating, is that it helps to build out assessment capable learners. And when we further define, well, what does it mean to be an assessment capable learner? What does an assessment capable learner look like, sound like? How do we know that we're in building and cultivating these innate and internal capabilities and characteristics and skills so that students are confident? Students not only see learning through the what is on display in the classroom, but they begin to see themselves as their own teachers. When we think about assessment capable learners, here is a range of traits and characteristics. Assessment capable learners know their current levels of understanding. They know where they're going, they're confident, they take on the challenge, they recognize, here's what I will need to be able to work through this task. Right? I know what success looks like. Feedback for me is something that helps to move my learning forward. And then I'm also willing to provide feedback to my peers. Assessment capable learners know that they will need to perhaps make some adjustments as they acquire and consolidate those skills. So they monitor their progress. They use the tools to be able to defend where they currently see themselves. And then they're setting goals, They're setting goals so that they continue to move down that pathway of proficiency to master those learning outcomes, right? And then they also recognize this in others. So when we think about what highly effective teachers do to create a culture of learning that's going to produce those assessment capable learners, let's go ahead and get back to viewing the impact. How do these highly effective teachers impact the learning lives of students? So take a look at this expanded table here. And then again, think about, well, what are some of the ways that you help to promote this, either with the students that you currently serve, or perhaps teachers and teams you currently support? How are the decisions that we're making around those units of study promoting these characteristics in our students? And again, for greater learning independence. So when we think about the long reach of teacher clarity, it's all about building out those assessment capable learners. And this is how they will express themselves, right? I know where I'm going. They will also think about, I have the tools that I need. And if I don't have all the tools, I know where to obtain them and who to ask for help and support. We also think about it through the lens that assessment capable learners are very confident, and they will go ahead and again describe, this is where I'm at in the continuum, this is where I'm headed, and these are the steps I need to take to achieve that goal. And then our assessment capable learners understand the relationship between what I'm learning today and how it's going to support me tomorrow, and perhaps how it links back to what I experienced yesterday. And so when we think about making that learning visible, here's what it helps to do. It makes learning accessible to students, and it provides them with opportunities to, again, try and figure things out, right? Rather than being curators of information, they're investigators. They're trying to explore and understand and make connections, and then again, express how they are processing their thinking, making meaning, and building out and firming up what they are acquiring and how they're consolidating it into their wheelhouse of learning experiences. And so what we do know is that to build assessment capable visible learners, it's the teachers that are going to spark that up. And so let's go ahead and just pause and connect with a student again as you are viewing this video, and perhaps it's a classic or a standard. It's been around for a long time and one that continues to inspire us. What can you hypothesize happened in this classroom that helped to build out the characteristics and traits that you see in this young learner as she responds to questions made by her teacher about progress in writing? So let's go ahead and view this. We'll debrief it at the end, but your viewing prompt is, what can you hypothesize about Sarah's experiences during her kindergarten year? Here we go.
Sarah, can you tell us how this chart works? We'll point to them and tell us about it.
I know nobody's on this, but some people may not be on this.
How come?
Because some people won't do that because we're in kindergarten, but some people might do that.
Good. Now go further up the chart and tell us about the middle of it, Sarah, around the orange crayon.
Well, some people sound it out and try and make their letters neat on this one.
Good. And what about further up the chart, Sarah? Then what happens?
On this one, they try to sound it out. They try to make their letters neatly and try to make the thing right. This is where I am. I sound it out. I try to keep them nicely written. I try to make the right words. I try to keep the letters with a space before they start. And I'm going over to here because it's the last step and I'm over at the 9 step. This is the 10 step.
All right, so what stood out to you from viewing or perhaps reviewing this video clip about Sarah's? Let's come together in the chat. She could identify her success criteria. This is a protocol, a procedure routine that is on display in the classroom. Students are asked to self-assess and then defend where they see themselves. She can identify her needs, not only her own needs, but did you all catch how she can perhaps identify the needs of others around her? Self-efficacy, absolutely. Monitoring her progress towards the goal, love that. And then again, she understood, this is my current level, this is where I'm headed, this is where I am now. Pathway to the goal, love that, Mary. Aware of success criteria. And so then the question is, what is your current practice in the classroom or perhaps at your school? Are the success criteria accessible to students so that they can use these as a tool to accurately judge progress and or progress towards that goal? And Rachel, you're spot on. It's all about ownership of that learning. So again, what is it that we are currently practicing in our classrooms that will help to contribute to this overarching goal of helping students evolve into those assessment capable learners, right? And so when we think about Sarah could explain her current status. She knew where she was headed and she understood what success looked like. So all of this to, again, once again reaffirm that Sarah is an assessment capable, visible learner. And there are multiple ways to be able to build these characteristics and traits in our students. What we want to bear in mind is that assessment capable learners, they know where they're headed, but only if we make that destination clear to them. And so that's what we're going to concentrate on during our time together. What are some ways that we can, again, make that learning visible and verbalize to our students through a variety of modalities? This is what we're taking on today. This is how it's going to help you. And this is how you'll know you have arrived, you have achieved that goal. And so what we want to, again, keep in mind that the most controllable factor in that journey for our students is the teacher. It's us, right? So let's think about how we can continue to invest in ourselves to make the difference in outcomes for our students. So there is additional information that has been shared to us through the visible learning research. And so when we think about, again, those highly effective teachers, what continues to be confirmed and reaffirmed is that there are characteristics that expert teachers possess. So take a look at these here. And then again, what are you noticing about these characteristics? What do they share in common? What is standing out to you about what's on display? And go ahead and share your thoughts in the chat. What excites you about this list? Self-reflection is key. I love that, Francis. Thank you so much. Students are at the heart, at the core. Absolutely. There's a balance between surface and deep learning. So again, how are we choreographing those meaningful learning experiences that invite the learner to loop in and loop out, surface level knowing and deep level thinking? Student-centered. Influenced by expert teachers, large effect sizes. So again, last round with John, he was very consistent in reminding us about the potential that these influences have on outcomes. And that potential is combined with interactions and implementation. And so our goal is for all of you who are with us today to, again, think through systematically, what are some of the ways that you are building out a firm and robust culture of learning that's going to make that learning accessible for students. So again, moving from sporadic and chance and hope, I think it's going to work for most of my students, or some of my students do, intentionality by design. The confidence to know that this unit of study is equipped with everything that we will need to achieve those goals, right? You have every single student in mind. Beautiful. And I do want to take this moment to welcome Doug, who is with us. Hello, Doug.
Hello, Olivia, and all 360 of you in the room. Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
It's wonderful to have you here, Doug. Yay, right? All right, everyone, say hello to Doug.
Hi, everyone. Super
We
sweet.
We love the energy in the chat.
Yep. Aloha. Hello, hello.
It's really good to see you, Doug. So characteristics of expert teachers, right? And so again, here's our why. Teacher clarity. When you think about the potential that teacher clarity has on outcomes for students, the research confirms it. It's high potency right here. There's multiple ways to create teacher clarity. Learning intentions and success criteria seem to be the hallmarks, right? But we also spent some time thinking about the 4 different doorways in last week. And so now what we're going to do is just continue to think through what is meant by teacher clarity.
And I saw the chat in there, about, is it easier than the list, harder than the list? I think teacher clarity is low-hanging fruit, and it's deceptively simple. So people think, oh, it's easy. You just have a learning intention and a success criteria, and you're good to go. And I think that is important. It is important to say, what are we learning today? How will we know we learned it? But the actual research on teacher clarity is much more complicated than this. It's about the clarity of the organization. How do we organize learning experiences in a logical flow? The clarity of our explanations. When we explain things to learners, is the explanation working? Is it logical? The clarity of our examples, the clarity of the assessments that we give students. All of that goes in together to get the effect size that you just saw 0.84. When I think about this, this is like the essentials of teaching. Do you know what you want students to learn? Do you know what it looks like to learn it, meaning assessment? And did you line it up? So to show you the effect sizes, I'll go back one, Olivia. To show you the effect sizes, organizing the instruction has a powerful influence on learning. You're probably not surprised by that because you've all seen disorganized instruction and how that didn't help the students learn. The next one is around explaining content. When teachers are really good at explaining the content, students learn more. That's not a surprise. When we provide good examples and then students practice opportunities, they learn more. Again, not a surprise. It's the making this happen for our students every day. And then finally, when we assess learning and actually do something about it, we actually can get better impact. There's a whole bunch of people who are writing about data teams right now and noting that data teams don't have the positive influence on learning that we think they do. We think, bringing teachers together to talk about data is going to be powerful. Turns out it's not. It's actually not powerful because 85% of the comments that teachers make when they talk about data are not related to what they can do about it. They are related to the learners. Well-meaning, well-intended. You hear comments like, I think this student has a disability. It was a bad day for this learner. It was a bad test. I mean, there are things happening at home. And we mean well when we talk about this, but it doesn't help us have conversations about where to next. And I think that's the power of teacher clarity. Do you know where the learners are? Do you organize instruction? Do you assess that and then say, okay, where to next based on this?
Otherwise, you end up with this. We like to think about clarity as the antidote to anxiety. Like Doug said, perhaps when we are examining data, we want to think about the learner who didn't meet the goal. Did the learner have a bad day? Or let's go back and examine the assessment itself, right? And so we're constantly looping in and out to ensure that every aspect of the experiences are lining up with clarity so that, again, we are eliminating or perhaps diffusing potential confusion and really opening up that learning space for our students where their affective filter is balanced. And again, what's on display for that learning is aligned with those outcomes and those goals. So it's all about the decisions that are made. It's all about the agreements that are reached. It's all about the readjustments that are made based on that continuous evaluation of impact, right? So when we think about that potential, we also want to think about, well, what are we currently implementing, right? That's working. And then what do we need to adjust because it's not working? And what we're excited about with our teacher clarity work is that in the playbook specifically, we have, again, a crosswalk between the teacher clarity work and PLCs. What we want to, again, express is teacher collaboration is vital for raising expectations for all students. And the best way we know how to improve our teacher clarity is to do it in the company of others. So when we're organizing, when we're explaining, when we're identifying those guided practice and examples, when we are assessing, that right there, whatever structure you use, we want to, again, think it through, that we're improving the quality of the learning. And our PLC structure here, the model that we're thinking about to make these experiences, again, make this system systematic is our PLCs. So one of the resources that is included in the Teacher Clarity Playbook is, again, a crosswalk between the 5 PLC plus questions and then the modules in the Teacher Clarity Playbook. And so the use of the 5 PLC questions, it keeps the focus on the learning outcomes. Just to reaffirm what Doug just shared, right? And these are powerful discussions here to have because they improve instruction and then it makes outcomes for students also accessible and improves those as well. So we're talking about how do we collectively build our own teacher efficacy and how can we, again, make some adjustments so that time we're investing together with our peers and our colleagues are fueled through a process that's going to lead to that improvement, that's going to lead to greater outcomes for all of our students. I love that. The road to collective efficacy right here. So it's in your hands, right? So when we think about our current systems, the questions are what are driving how we're investing the time together and in each other. And so we're looking at it through the lens of let's set a vision for teaching and learning. Let's build that out. What do we believe we can achieve together? What do we believe? What's our identity, our philosophy around teaching and learning? Let's activate that conversation in a productive approach. These PLC questions help to shape that out, right? And then let's restore confidence with each other. We know it's difficult right now. It's difficult outside of a pandemic, but it's become even more evident how difficult it is, but it's not impossible, right? So then how can we use our collective strength to once again focus on what really matters, right? And over time, those wins, those successes breed more success. And it's about our own growth. And it's about really celebrating that progress, right? So how do we get better over time? How do we immerse ourselves in a process and in a system where we're constantly evaluating our impact and then using evidence to inform us about that impact so that we can make adjustments and do something differently next time. So when we think about our teacher clarity journey, this is what we believe.
Mhm.
It's continuous. It's an evolution. It's a transformation that happens over time.
Yep.
And that right there leads us here.
And the power of the collective is powerful. When groups of teachers come together and they say, we can influence learning, and then they have evidence that feeds that belief system, there's no stopping them. The highest impact on learning. It's been around a long time, 35 years people have been talking about it, applied to teachers. You know, Bandura put this out there, collective efficacy, a long time ago, in addition to individual efficacy. But the power of the collective, the beliefs we build, as well as the evidence we look at to say, are we making a difference?
Oh, I love that, Doug. Am I or we making a difference, right? Because we also need space for our own self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we are clear about, okay, this is how I'm processing my most recent experience as it's related to this unit of study, let me go ahead and merge that. How did it go for my colleagues, right? And then again, spark up a conversation that's going to promote transformation, improvement, and increase outcomes for students. And Michelle, thank you for sharing that. So collective teacher efficacy continues to be the #1 influence in outcomes for students. So the more we can get together in a systematic way, it's going to serve our students well, and it's going to, again, fortify us in all the ways that matter. So let's go ahead and take a look at, all right, so what can we do to continue to fine tune our practices that are going to line up with those multiple ways to build out clarity? So here's an organizer that is helpful, that's an effective way to think about, all right, what can we do to, again, clarify the learning for our students? And so it takes us back to the learning intentions, the success criteria, and then the 3 clarity questions that are the drivers of clarity. So take a moment to reconnect with just some language around these 3 approaches for teaching with clarity. And what we're going to do now is, again, elaborate on the first sessions, learning with John and Kateri. We're going to look at it now through the lens of how do we plan with clarity in mind? And so again, it's the questions that are fueling and driving the decisions, the discussions, and the agreements you all reach collaboratively. And here's a tool that is a useful tool that's very complementary to the decisions made at the planning table. And so as you look at this, it is from this resource here, Bringing Clarity to Science Instruction, but there's something about the questions that are universal that hit whatever content you are teaching. But these guiding questions, once again, get us back to those vital elements that make that learning visible. So we'll go through each one, but right now we wanted to provide you with an overall snapshot of guiding questions that are complementary to, again, the decisions that are being made as you are all designing those units of study. So when we think about what do I want my students to learn, that right there is all about, again, those learning intentions, right? It's about the learning. What knowledge will be gained from these experiences rather than what are the activities my students are going to complete. So is this question present when you are all collaborating to build out these units of study? The next question is, what's the evidence? What will we gather? What we want to do is come together with shared assessments so that way we can get through and pick those results apart and profile. What do they represent? What does this mean? Right? And then again, we get back to our PLC questions when we're looking at that data. Who benefited, who did not? What do we notice about those trends? And then how do we respond for the next time? So this right here, it's again, what do students need to know and be able to do? And the success criteria begin to take shape. And so this is a different approach to planning because it's focusing in on the learning. When we think about the next question, the third question is, okay, so this is checking for understanding. This is, again, a technique that we want to purposefully time so that we are able to check in with students during those points of confusion, right? So we want to plan in front of those lessons and anticipate the kinds of errors that students may potentially make and what those errors represent along that learning continuum. What approach will get my students to mastery? This is the guided inquiry approach. And so we're thinking deeply into the learning side of the knowledge that students are gaining. This is where that cognitive dissonance and that productive struggle begin to balance each other out. And we start to think about those chewable chunks. How much is just the right amount so as not to frustrate students? And then my feedback is going to fuel them so that they hear me say, this is what I need you to practice to improve, right? So again, really being clear about those key steps that are leading to fulfillment of that learning goal, and those key steps framed through success criteria. And the feedback is fueling progress, moving that learning forward. And while we are thinking about the bite-sized chunks for learning, we also want to think about it through the lens of rigor, right? How do I then identify multiple ways to access? And how do I provide multiple opportunities for my students to practice deliberately that are synced up with those grade level expectations? And one of the approaches that, again, just is back in the spotlight is the role of preview and review, right? What will students need to preview in advance of actually getting into those tasks? And so we look at vocabulary, we look at sentence frames, and we, again, create an experience and an opportunity for learners to watch and observe how these are used. So we are apprenticing out that expert thinking and the expert application so that students can then take on those tasks and then know what it feels like to make progress towards that goal. What we also want to think about are the resources. What will we need? And make sure that we have those readily available for students. We also think about how will we group our students to incorporate opportunities for that collaboration, that intentional collaboration where students can then work through a task together and sync up and link up with perspectives of those around them. And the final question, again, is for us to think about how will we manage this learning? So how will we organize those instructional minutes? So there's a nice balance between direct instruction, guided practice, collaborative learning, and independent learning. And this right here is establishing those very consistent protocols for how we engage in learning in our classrooms. So what I'd like for you to think about is, well, what is your current system for planning? And how perhaps can a system like this support what you currently have in place? So as we think about how do we implement learning experiences that promote students figuring out learning rather than just learning about what's being presented, right? Student clarity comes from teacher clarity. So let's take a moment to reflect on this question write this out somewhere for yourselves or perhaps in the chat. But based on what was just shared, how might these guiding questions enhance and or complement current systems for planning in place at your sites? Intentionality. Thank you, Sandra. It makes it more clear for me as a teacher before I even start instruction. Such a useful tool. And I love that some of you are looking at specific questions to implement to a current set of questions that perhaps are driving your planning. Excellent.
Super cool.
Yeah. All right, so before we head into the 9 components of teacher clarity, again, thank you so much for your connections, for sharing your thoughts, your ideas. Quality planning. 2 of my favorite words. All right. Well, Doug, now we're getting into the Teacher Clarity Playbook. And it's moving us into the modules that are part of this resource. And each module is designed, again, to move through a systematic process that begins and ends with the standards. And then it also moves practice from analysis to assessment. And so over time, it builds habits of mind and efficiency of planning that mobilizes, once again, greater outcomes for students. So here they are. And each one of them, again, represents an aspect of clarity that's going to produce meaningful learning for students and then meaningful teaching for teachers. And so what we wanted to do is take you through a couple of the modules so that you can experience the thinking, the discussions that are, again, just sparked up as we take on different practices during our collaborative planning. And so the first one here is identifying concepts and skills. And one unique feature, there are many, but one of the ones that I potentially just really, really love are these overview sketches that help to the viewer orient your thoughts around, okay, what is this topic all about? So let's go ahead and look at module number 1. These sketches were contributed by Terrell Hansen. She's a nationally board certified teacher. I joke that I talk about her like she's my best friend. I've never met her, but I feel like I know her because again, these sketches just draw you in and open up just your prior knowledge, experiences, connections you're making currently or in the past about these topics. So let's go ahead and share that with you all. Take a look at this overview sketch. And again, as you are examining it, what stands out to you, and add those connections in the chat. When we think about concepts and skills, nouns and verbs. Know, apply, and when to use. Know and do, types of knowledge. Standards-based, connections throughout the learning process. The whistle. Yes, so it's a playbook, right? So you'll see the coach along the way. He's our very own, or she's our very own. Where's Waldo? Where's Wilma? And there are different parts of each of these overview sketches that are accentuated. What they all share in common is the play. So this module is all about analyzing the standards. The metacognition is implied here. All right, very well. All right, so let's go.
So there are all kinds of ways to analyze standards. There's piles of ways. When we were doing our work, we decided to take a pretty simple version of this so that we could say, let's look at the standard and let's plan learning intentions, success criteria, and then learning experiences, and then eventually assessment. So the very simple format is nouns and verbs. And I saw that on the chat as you were doing. Nouns generally tell us, or noun phrases, generally tell us what are the concepts that students need to learn. Now, our standards are kind of a mix of declarative knowledge, procedural knowledge, and conditional knowledge. It would be way easier if all of the standards were at the same level. They're not. So we have to look at the standards and say, what are the major concepts students would have to learn if they had mastery of this standard? Or, by the way, these standards, because we tend to teach them in combination. So here's a couple examples. 4th grade, look at all those concepts in this one standard. Now, my reflection is the standards have been out for a while in most states. And I think what we're doing now is cherry picking concepts we like and that we're comfortable with. So I think it's time to revisit the standards and say, what are all of the concepts that students need to know to be able to demonstrate mastery? Here's another example. I mean, what 6th grade teacher doesn't like to talk about unit rate and unit pricing and constant speed? They love talking about the concepts inside the standard. Another example, 7th grade, central ideas, text, the way it develops over the course, summary. There's all these concepts in there that you would have to learn. World history, ideology, French Revolution, Napoleon, all these concepts that teachers love. Now, the cool thing is once you've done this work of concepts and skills, then you have to figure out what's the right order to put them in. We'll come to that in a little bit. But right now, we're just looking at what would students have to learn to be successful with these standards. The verbs and verb phrases tell us the skills. What are the skills that students have to develop? I believe teacher teams are not spending sufficient time on the skills. I think we mostly spend our energy on the concepts. Well, we like the concepts because the concepts represent what we went to school for, the big ideas that we all care about. We've got to get better at analyzing the verbs and verb phrases. Here's an example. For 4th graders, they have to interpret. What does that mean, interpret? Like I was a sign language interpreter before. Is that what we mean by interpret, or is there a different meaning? They have to explain. They have to contribute to an understanding. There are some big concepts and skills in the standard. So we're not going to just spend our time talking about information and the way it's presented. We're not going to talk about just charts and graphs and diagrams. We're going to talk about what it means to interpret and explain using that information in a text. Solve seems so simple. What does it mean to solve? Yeah. Look at this one. Determine, analyze, provide. What does it mean to determine? Is it to identify? Is it to find? What do we mean by determine and analyze? These are conversations teams should have. Teams should be having these conversations. Wow, for 10th graders, what do we mean by explain? Is that verbal? An explanation verbally? I think this one means you better have a claim, some evidence, and reasons for your claim. That's what they mean by explain. Because 10th grade explain means a lot. It's not just simply being able to say, you know, here's Napoleon, here was the ideology, here's the French Revolution. The skill is to be able to explain. And a point I'd like to make about this is vertical and horizontal. Thanks, Olivia. Vertical and horizontal. Most teams only work horizontally. We've got these PLC models that are a little dated, where only third grade teachers talk to third grade teachers and world history teachers talk to world history teachers, and it's all horizontal. And we never look vertically at what's happening with concepts and skills across time. So we do see some PLC teams meeting vertically, some amazing conversations. Now they have to bring evidence, but it doesn't have to be a common formative assessment. They have to bring evidence. Let's say they're taking on the main idea standard. And there's a group of teachers, grade 3, 4, and 5. And they all come together with their work on main idea. Because you know, we teach main idea for a lot of years in these standards. So let's look at one particular standard. In grade 3, we are going to determine this main idea. And then we're going to recount key details. And so we have as a grade 3 team to talk about what do we mean by determine. But that happens again in grade 4 and 5. So is grade 4 determine and grade 5 determine the same? Is grade 6 determine the same because it has 2 or more main ideas rather than main idea? I don't think so. And then grade 6 goes determine again, grade 7 has determine again, grade 8 has determine again. And we have to think through, what does it mean to exhibit this skill at the appropriate grade level? And this is the conversation most teams never have. They analyze all the concepts and then we undershoot the skill. And then students don't perform well on external measures of success. Now, this particular standard goes all the way through grades 9, 10, and 11, and 12. So we start this idea of determine in grade 3, and we continue determine all the way through grade 12. And as I noticed in the chat, no, level grade 3 determine is not the same as grade 9 determine. Teams have to talk about the skills and what we mean by those skills.
And so, what is your process? How are you currently engaging in vertical and horizontal collaboration to talk about the overall impact that is derived from unpacking the standards, right? And looking at those standards through those noun lens and that verb lens, bridging them together so that way, again, we are identifying the tasks that are going to help to build out what is to be gained from the standards that are prioritized and clustered together. This right here is what's going to lead to acceleration, to movement of that learning forward, a deep, deep, deep understanding of what it means for your particular grade level, but then how it connects to the grade level that follows. So let's just take some time to reflect. And as you think about your current practice around unpacking standards, deconstructing standards, however it's framed at your sites or in your organization, how does this align with the current practice of thinking through and talking through and reaching agreements around a shared understanding around those standards? So reflect somewhere for yourselves, and then let's meet up in the chat. What are some of the takeaways? What stood out to you from this segment on our teacher clarity journey? And as you are processing this, what's one action you can take? What are some outcomes that you would like to see to approach planning with this in mind?
Nice.
Mm. I think we have a new frame to add to our repertoire, Doug. What does it mean to
Yep.
finish that sentence? Trying to keep up with all of the connections. It's wonderful. It's a clean process. What does the verb mean at each grade level? Love that. Something that I see emerging from the connections, Doug, is just the need to reevaluate. Every year, we're serving different students. Every year, there's an opportunity for us to get back to what's working, what's not working. Where's our opportunity to boost up those areas that perhaps are moving us away from the intentionality of our prioritized standards. All right. Well, then this takes us to another touch point in teacher clarity. Is once we have already established what our prioritized standards are that are going to drive the learning, we also want to think about how do we line up the learning. So then this brings us to sequencing those learning progressions. And again, how do we line up learning so that there's an interconnectedness that is fueling deep thinking, deeper levels of learning throughout these meaningful learning experiences for students. And so let's go ahead and come together, get started, look at this overview sketch about learning progressions. Where do you see your thinking along the lines of what's on display? What stands out to you? What connections are you making? Or perhaps what's reaffirmed in your thinking about sequencing learning progressions? Mhm. This is the pathway to proficiency. Absolutely.
Yep.
And on that pathway, there are stepping stones, right, that we want to make sure that we hit and that are going to lead us to that ultimate goal. So it's this backward mapping, right? What's that big, enduring understanding that is at the core of our units? Plan backwards, the end in mind. So again, this thinking is all about articulating that pathway to proficiency. And if you notice what's illuminated in this sketch is we are headed towards those learning intentions. So last week, John and Kateri spent time just really further defining, picking apart this whole idea and practice of learning intentions and success criteria. Our aim for today is for you all to understand how it fits in the greater scope of building out and making learning visible for students, and then bringing it down to practices that help to establish that. And so this right here, it's all about the decisions that are being reached in the company of others. So when we think about learning progressions, here's another way to name it, to define it. So each of these tent poles represents a core essential concept, right? And all put together, they lift up the enduring understanding. And we often get asked, well, what's the correct way to order content? And our response is, well, there is no absolute way. We just know that the way you agree on, that's the way. That's your way is the correct way. Right?
There's probably wrong ways, but there's probably, I mean, like some concepts just can't come before others, but there's probably not just one way to do it.
And the goal is that you all are talking about it. So at your table, just put it all on display. What are your thoughts when we think about, okay, now that we've deconstructed, unpacked these standards, what's the logical sequence? And just everyone contribute their thoughts and ideas, and then start sorting them out. And the pathway to proficiency is going to be the way that you all calibrate and arrange. And again, the goal is that it's a logical sequence that makes sense. Thus then, making visible that pathway to fulfillment of what students need to know and be able to do at the end of these experiences. So here are just some definitions, common definitions that emerge from learning progression. So take a look at those. And of the four, which one resonates with you? Which one stands out to you? And add in the chat, what is it about that definition that you found meaningful? Students are expected to make progress, so 3 and 4. Number 2 helps with planning. You're drawn to the specificity. of some of these definitions. Mhm. All right. Thank you for reflecting, for thinking through, making connections. Again, this work, what it helps to establish is that pathway that's going to lead to mastery of those goals, and really thinking about, well, what are those prerequisite skills? So when we start to think about the progression, it starts to lead us to, all right, not all progressions are the same, right? There are certain progressions which have complexity that's going to take a bit longer to master. And so when we look at this image here, it reminds us that once we identify the progression that's going to lead and open up this learning, how many sessions, how many lessons is it going to take to master it? And some may take more than others. And that's part of, again, how you pull together with intentionality these lesson series that are going to lead to mastery of that bucket of knowledge. And what we want to also accentuate is that once you list out all the progressions, it doesn't mean that you're going to teach every single one.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go back and evaluate, okay, so what is known already by my students based on some pre-assessments? And then what of this sequence is new? And why we want to do that is because we want to identify where we're going to start the learning. Right? So that way our students are engaged, they're motivated, and they're not bored because they already know what's being presented, right? We want our students to, again, recognize that, ooh, this is new learning that I'm taking on, and I'll rely on my prior knowledge to be able to engage. So when we think about the starting point for our learners, we want to identify it because then that signals the starting point for our teaching. All right, so now this brings us to assessing clarity with our 3 favorite questions. These are the drivers, right? So again, when we think about how do we assess clarity along the way, we don't decide if we're clear. Our students decide. Our students inform us if we're clear to them. And these are the questions that bridge that. So when we think about the 3 questions, we're thinking about them through the lens of learning intentions, relevance, and success criteria, right? And we want to, again, accentuate the relevant side of it. This is where, once again, it's reaffirmed in our thinking that motivation and engagement is the catalyst to learning. And so then how do we name the relevance to our students to draw them into these experiences? And then how do we take these clarity questions and continue to just build out our culture of learning and make them accessible, not only to our students and to ourselves, but to our families? Right? So this is a way that we can bridge the experiences students have in our care to the ones that parents are interested about when students go to their homes. Right? So let's use these also as a tool for parents to spark up a discussion with their children at home, loved ones with their learners at home. So talk to me about, what did you learn today and why do you think you need to know that? Or how do you know you were successful? What kind of feedback did you receive from your teacher that lets you know that you learned, that you made progress? That's a very big shift from how was school? What did you do? Now suddenly we are putting our students again in a position where they're going to express what was memorable. What are they remembering about the experiences in the classroom. So these 3 questions really help to further define teacher clarity in your buildings, right? And so we cannot stress this enough. We don't decide if we're clear, our students do. And these 3 questions are a nice way to get students to purposefully talk and express, right, what they remember, and then we can assess clarity in the classroom. And so when they are presented to students, it's simple. We talk about it. Okay, what are you learning today? Why are you learning it? How will you know you've learned it? So for those of us who are principals or have been principals, when we walk into classrooms, leaders, instead of asking students, what are you doing? These are the questions that are driving that interaction with students. Talk to me. How's the learning working out for you today? What was challenging for you? What was easy for you? Where do you see yourself now? Are you getting closer to your goal? It just invites a different kind of interaction with students. And so this is a practice that's used to, again, look at it through the lens of, all right, overall, how are we making progress towards students being able to respond accurately to these 3 questions? And so here's a snapshot of data that was collected by a leadership team out at Health Sciences, right? And so take a look at this data table. How would you interpret these results? What does it say about the current practice of assessing clarity using these 3 clarity questions?
We, the leaders of the schools ask about 100 students a week on average. And then we report it every Friday. Every Friday we are clear, like, this is what we saw. What does it mean? Oh, and Janet used to work at the school, and she remembers these Friday emails of, here's where we were with clarity this week. And what are we going to do about it? Even more importantly, what are these data telling us?
And I love, Doug, that, it's one thing to go in and ask students questions, but this right here is capturing a snapshot of, we walked into this number of classrooms, we spoke to this number of students, this is what they replied, and then calibrating all that data and presenting it to the staff. It's not opinion. This was today, or this was this week. Let's talk about it. What does it say about our practice? What's going on? What were the dips? What contributed to the dips?
Yeah.
And then again, taking the emotions and turning them into actions. And then again, being really clear about the outcomes we expect to see. It's about investing in a process we believe in rather than compliance. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's always so interesting to, again, interpret data in the company of others and to connect with how others are processing what is presented. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then I like to think of them as just some gentle nudges, right? Maybe we need to invest a little more time around relevance. Let's get back to our plans, and maybe let's just build that out a bit further. But then also let the students know, listen, we're always learning too. We just looked at some data on Friday, and here's my commitment to you for this week, right? So that students understand.
Yeah, Olga, perfect. Weinhauer harder.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted you to see this because this is real data. We're working really hard to increase clarity, and it's not 100%. And we choose, the leaders choose to ask kids that are somewhat on the margins. And they often ask kids that, well, we know if this kid can answer, 10 more kids can likely answer. But that's what we hold ourselves to. And the amazing conversations we have, boy, this is from the year before the pandemic, but boy, look at that success criteria stuff. We were just not good at success criteria. We were just not there.
Mhm. So it's not just about our students owning the learning, right? And owning the effort and the investment, but it's about us owning the results and getting behind the story of those results and then taking action. So let's go ahead and share with you just submissions around these clarity questions and how they're used to, once again, provide some data for teachers so that teachers can then make some decisions about how do we continue to support our students. So here we have Flipgrid recording. And so just take a look and think about technology integration from the experiences that we shared and had during the pandemic, and how can we cherish those technology integration tools that brought us closer to our students, and then again, provided us with the data that we need to continually improve the learning for our students.
Hello. Today, we learned about the Gilded Age, which was a time of fast economic growth. We're learning about the Gilded Age because it was a crucial part of American history where we start to make our own commodities and take in many immigrants. I know I learned something because I can define urbanization and explain the inequalities faced by immigrants, like how they were forced into poverty and inhumane living spaces.
All right, so based on that recording, what stood out to you about what the student chose to share? And this recording, again, it's connected back to the 3 clarity questions, provided evidence. And so a question that comes up, are all students expected to submit a recording? No, right? We want it to be manageable for us as well. So targeted students are selected, right? Based on that progress monitoring. And so then a small number of students will be asked to submit, and then this will be a data source where, again, it's about, is your teaching clear for your students? Are you teaching with clarity? And so it becomes deeply immersed in how we gather evidence and do something with it. Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Which brings us to relevance. And when we think about relevance, right, students will often say, why are we learning this? And so one approach that I have observed used by many teachers is holding that relevance close to home and letting students know, once again, listen, what we learned yesterday is going to help you with today's learning. And so again, thinking about ways to make that relevance clear to students so that they are motivated and engaged, but then also understand the relationship, understand how it's going to help them as a learner. And self-regulation is one thing that is in front of us, and we are, again, looking for different ways to help students feel confident and competent to take on the challenge of learning. And so when students are able to see themselves and understand that relationship, again, we are able to just answer for them, what is in it for me? So this is something that we want to be very intentional about. Do we need to make the relevance closer to home for our students, or is this something that is accessible to outside of the 4 walls of the classroom? So these are the decisions. This is the balance that we're looking to strike, so that way students don't check out, right? And for many of us, students already show up checked out. So how do we creatively draw them in without mimics, but rather with just real examples or perhaps connections to what they're interested in, right? So again, building in opportunities for students to share What are you interested? What interests you about this topic? Do you have questions? Incite that curiosity. And so we're looking at it through the lens of the utility value, right? But then the relatableness, if that's even a word, the relatedness of this work. And this is all about, again, when we think about the utility of those concepts, we're thinking about just a deep understanding of the relevancy of their learning and how it's going to move them forward from declarative, factual, recall, memorization to procedural, conditional, right? Knowing how to apply it and when to apply it. So when you think about that second question, relevance, think about it through the lens of what to how to when. And that right there is going to draw your students in closer at a time when they're feeling very far removed from the learning because they feel like, oh, I'm not even there, right? So this is our way to draw them in, viewing it through this lens. And one of the effective ways to do this and make that learning relevant is to just recognize it through the lens of how will this help you as a learner? How is this going to grow you as a learner? Or how will this assist you outside of the four walls of the classroom? And so in your collaborative space, that's what you're talking about as well. Mm-hmm. Why is this important for students? How does it fit into the bigger scope of the learning? And how are we going to, again, spiral it in and time it just right so that students stay engaged throughout the learning? And so these questions still continue to come up. Yeah, but when am I going to use this anyway, right? Mm-hmm. And so we can creatively just say in the next couple of minutes with this task, right? Here's the big picture. Here's where it's leading. So pique students' interest, right? And plant those seeds. Find out what they're interested in. And then share your own experiences. So that way, perhaps they can find just some tranquility in knowing that you as a learner were also interested in, didn't know about this subject, but you took some time to learn about it. And now you're going to share those experiences, share that knowledge, so that way you can build knowledge together. So this is all about, again, motivation, engagement. So what are some current ways that have worked for you all to keep students connected, present in what they are experiencing at school, in your care? What are some techniques that you're using that perhaps provide an opportunity for students to share with you about their interests? And as you're reflecting and writing this down somewhere, let's come together in the chat as a community and share with us what's worked. Choice boards, yes. Choice is always important.
I think when teachers bring passion to the classroom, and that's, I think when you bring your dynamism and your passion, some students just fall into the learning because the teacher is so passionate. I mean, there are things I've learned that I really did not intend to learn because the person teaching was so passionate about it. I'm like, wow, I'm actually learning a lot because that person cares so much about this and about me learning.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I can think of some experiences I've shared, and I'm wondering, okay, all right, so that was so powerful. How can I reorganize my life so that I can continue to learn more about that subject? For sure. And I just think of energy, Doug, too. It's how do teachers just ignite that energy as part of students reestablishing a relationship with learning. Mm-hmm. And speaking of relationships, thank you, Deanna. Mm-hmm. Just building in that time of getting to know who are the students in front of me? What are they interested in? What am I interested in? What am I going to put on the spotlight? Something that intrigued me, something that made me more curious about, using that language. Oh yeah, Tracy. I think about that epic scene in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Bueller. There's some great ideas that are being shared in the chat. Thank you all so much. What do we put on display that just, once again, hits at the heart, hits at the minds of our students, that keeps them motivated, energized? Mhm. All right. Well, this now brings us to the third question, which is all about our success criteria. And so again, as we're thinking about learning intentions, making that destination clear, and then also the relevancy side of it, how is this going to help you as a learner? How is this going to help us in the learning? And how will this help you continue to learn more about the topic? We want to get to that point where how will students know that they've arrived, right? Know where you're going, but then recognize when you've arrived. And it's that success criteria. The language of success criteria helps the learner make that connection and use those to judge accurately progress towards those learning goals. So let's go ahead and view a video, Voices from Students. 8th graders discuss the power of learning intentions and success criteria, and then we'll debrief it at the conclusion of it. But again, as we're fitting in all of the pieces together, let's get back into the classrooms and view this through the lens of impact, right? What does this do for the learner? Here we go.
All right, so we're gonna get started. Dejor, will you read our learning target for us today?
I can group ideas together within my body paragraph to best support my thesis.
All right, so at this point, we've done a lot of work.
When we go into the classroom, usually the first thing that we see for the day is our learning targets.
The learning targets aren't really just there. The teachers usually make sure that everyone understands what's going on before they dive into the learning.
And what I'd like to just know, what are some things that you're noticing right now?
A lot of times the teacher will take time in the beginning of class to break down the learning targets so we know what we're trying to go for, and it gives kind of a purpose.
I'd love for you to have a conversation with the folks in your group about what you remember, and you can actually pull those pieces out. What were some of the things that were included in a body paragraph?
It sort of consists of like RDF or like point or statement. Or like about the book.
There's a lot of peer sharing and talking with the people at your table. And so you can kind of bounce ideas off of the people that you're sitting with to see if they maybe have a better understanding of it than you do.
So I think once you set them up in the intro paragraph, your body paragraph is where you're like getting everything they need to understand.
I know personally what the teacher wants me to learn after she's explained the learning target at the beginning of class, but also I've asked any questions and clarifying questions as to what I need to know.
When you first get a learning target, a lot of people will kind of be unsure about what that really means, and that's where the self-assessment comes in, like the fist of 5, the thumb. So, and actually I think it's really important for the teacher to see that too, to kind of assess for themselves, okay, so where do I really need to address with this group of students? Do they really get it?
So thumbs up, thumbs down. If you guys feel like that part is...
Are they not really getting it at all? Then the teacher can feel confident they've got this target. They really know what to do. They really know where they're going with it. And then, when there's some students that are kind of this way, they can kind of assess, okay, this student's going to need some more help. And I think that really goes back to the whole topic of what Odyssey is really about is making sure that all students succeed and that all students are doing well, and that it's no student is falling short while the rest are moving ahead.
Awesome. So you remember in the beginning of class when I said when you work on organization, there's a bonus?
I know when I understand a learning target, when I feel like the confidence I can say that I can do whatever the learning target says, because a learning target isn't necessarily just like a purpose of what you're learning about. It's also a statement. So I think that once you do understand, I think it's the confidence that you can present it in through a project or whatever the teacher is asking you to do.
I can see myself doing a project or doing something that goes along with the learning target.
You can see yourself producing something or having a project that is going to capture that target.
Not just some students know what we're being asked to learn about. All students understand the concept. And I think that's a concept that is very great, because if students don't really understand the concept of what they're trying to learn, then there's no way they can really succeed if they don't know what their purpose is.
You always know what you're doing, and you're very rarely confused about things.
And then here's the evidence of how
And I think that's like a lot of kudos to the teachers, because they do take the time to explain everything at the beginning of class, and they also take the time to explain anything that you have questions about individually or with the whole class, so the whole class can get what you're trying to get.
So as you're reflecting on this video, what stood out to you? How are you processing what you're thinking about as it relates to teaching with clarity and making learning visible for students? Let's meet up in the chat. Learning, not doing.
And don't you just love hearing them like, I know why this is important. I know why I need to know this.
I like the comment every time. Kudos to the teachers.
Yeah.
You are appreciated. Students care when learning is clear. Oh, I love that. Beautiful. Students feel empowered. And one aspect about the teacher clarity work is this communication is communicated consistently throughout the learning, throughout the lessons. So again, as students are gaining more knowledge and they're able to process at deeper levels, these gentle nudges, these reminders will keep them on that pathway to proficiency. So it really is about the habits of mind that we develop that, again, fuel those experiences for students. So not only do they care, but they're excited, they're motivated, and they're engaged. I'm loving the comments. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Oh, and Melissa, I love your comment, right? What we just viewed is so much more than compliance, something that's just posted on the wall, but it's a driver of the learning. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that so frustrating when learning intentions just become compliance? Someone said we have to do this, rather than a commitment, a way to drive students learning deeper.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I appreciate about our approach to teacher clarity, Doug, is that it's a process that we believe in because it works. We're building knowledge. And so why not invest? Why not invest in our professional learning so we get really, really good at it, right? Really good at, yes, speed limits. You know they're there when you violate them, right? That was his example last week, right? Say when someone walks in through that door. Yeah. So if the current practice is, okay, the expectation is to display them, how can you take that expectation and move it next level? So it just doesn't remain there. Doesn't have to remain there, right? We're empowered. We're empowered to elevate that practice and let students know and remind each other about why it makes that learning clear for our students. Love it. All right. So when we think about our success criteria, it really is how we're going to set the stage or set the table, right, for learning. And how are we going to let students know this is how we're measuring success today, not at the end of the unit, but rather today. My feedback to you is going to be around what you currently control and what we're going to practice to grow. So when we think about our success criteria, it should also answer, right, more questions in the minds of students and the ones that they're thinking about. Where are we going with this? Let's let them know this is where we're going with this, with the learning, how it connects, where we're headed, right? And this is how I want you to put these ideas together, the relationship, calling it out for students. So that way they view these success criteria as part of assessment as learning. As it's ongoing, we're going to use these tools to judge our progress, to accurately make some decisions about where to next. So that self-assessment, it helps to build out those assessment capable visible learners, right? That self-assessment, getting into our metacognition, right? It gets back to regulation. It's where students are figuring out what to do when they don't know what to do and we're not around. What's on display in the classroom that's going to aid them back into figuring out, all right, what is my goal to get me back on that pathway or to keep me on that pathway to proficiency? So some of the ways that we, again, think about, all right, how do we make this not only relevant to our students, but how do we check in to firm up? What is it that students know about this topic and how do we make those decisions on our feet, those adjustments on our feet to continue to make this relevant? So here are just some examples. Using, again, technology tools for that immediate access that can be publicly put on display for students, right? All eyes on the canvas, right? And so again, the creativity that teachers take on to make learning visible. It works. It works. Here's another way to take the practice of success criteria and before you move on, asking students, rate yourself. Where do you see yourself? How successful were you today? How confident are you about your success today? And so these success criteria drive, right, the decisions that students are making about where to next. Last week, we saw just how we can take single point rubrics to, again, motivate learners to stay on course, right? Where I shine and what I can refine, taking those elements that appear in perhaps a 4-point rubric and dropping it into just that one column of proficiency and having that be the point of reference where students are, again, making decisions about where am I, what do I need to do, and when have I reached mastery. And so now putting it into the context of today's professional learning, right? How are you thinking about success criteria and this approach to that self-assessment for students? How are your thoughts continuing to evolve around this practice? What excites you about success criteria? What are you curious about? What questions are coming up? And so these 3 clarity questions, again, driven by that learning intention, relevance, and success criteria. Is it all coming together for you? So just reflect, write down some notes for yourself. And this is where we're headed now. Let's put it all together. So how do we build out our communication that's going to make learning visible for students? So here's a frame that has jump started, right? This practice. So take a look at this frame. And I love it because it's just a nice connection to those 3 clarity questions. All just put together in a nice statement that again will be helpful for students. So as you are looking at this frame, let's go ahead and look at some examples, right? Let's look at it through some subjects that aren't the ones that we usually put a spotlight on, but in geography, here's an example of how we can take that frame that represents all 3 driving questions of clarity, right? I am learning where I live in the universe so that I know where I am and where I can go. I'll know that I know it when I can explain exactly where I live by planet, continent, country, state, city, and address. So success criteria, learning intention, relevance. Let's look at it in writing. And so is there an absolute way to word these just right and perfectly? Your way is the right way. And here is a tool to help cement it around those drivers of clarity. Here we have an example in science. And here's an example in math. And so again, these emerge from that initial unpacking, deconstruction of those standards to identify those concepts and skills. They emerge from the discussions that you all have about the learning and why it's important. And as you decide on what are the essentials, how are we going to sequence this out? So we're going from the planning table to the experiences inside the classroom that are going to get us inside that lesson. So as you think about that teacher clarity frame, right? Let's take a couple of minutes to perhaps compose 1 or 2 examples for yourselves somewhere so that you keep it handy and in mind. And let me go ahead and cue it up once more for you. So close your eyes. There it is. So let's practice for a couple of minutes. Compose, finish this, complete this frame, or go back to something you have on display now and build it out a bit further using this frame. And jot that down for yourself somewhere. So if you're supporting teachers or if you are currently taking on this work, this right here is a good way, an effective way just to get into the habit of composing communication to students that is grounded in the practice of making that destination clear with the learning intention, including the relevance, why this is important, how it's going to help you as a learner, how it's going to help us in the learning, and then the success criteria, right? So like a mashup, all inclusive, all in one location. All right.
You want to show those examples again?
Yes, I was getting to that, Doug. Here we go. I saw April's request. Here you go. Thank you so much for our culture of appreciation. I'm glad that you all are finding this useful, helpful. That was our goal. So I'm just thinking in an era where we're using vocabulary and frames to help our students express their thinking more concisely, why not use this practice for ourselves?
I'm not sure how long it'll be available, but
All right. Well, good. So we really appreciate, again, your investment in our professional learning experience. Our goal is to continue to improve our practice, to continue to improve the impact that we have in the lives of our students. So it's all about taking it back and moving forward. So thank you again for being here with us. Just love the energy that was transmitted through the chat. What an honor to be a part of this powerful community. So again, I just want to share with you all, right? Know where you're going, carry on with clarity, know where you're going, and recognize when you've arrived. Thank you.
thank you all.